Mom, we need a couple of Dad's t-shirts. What? T-shirts? What? Yeah, we need a couple of Dad's t-shirts. Why? Because we need jerseys. And my brother was right next to me. Yeah, because we need jerseys. And she's sitting there thinking about it. And I'm like, can we, Mom? And she's like, well, I guess it's all right. And as soon as she said, I guess it's all right, we turned around and we ran straight for the bedroom. And I can hear it in the background going, don't use any of the good ones. Use the old ones. Hello, everybody. My name is Bishop Friesch, and I want to welcome you to My Life Through Music. And this next song that is in my Life Through Music playlist is We Are the Champions, performed by Queen, released in 1977. And this is a great song, another great song. And I guess it could be considered kind of like an anthem. I don't think it would be a ballad. It's not necessarily a love song. But I remember hearing it for the first time at an awards ceremony when they were announcing the first place team in my first soccer team, my first soccer season. And this was, again, you've probably heard this before, but back when everybody didn't always get a trophy and that winning, was kind of all that mattered. And it seemed like for a few years, whether it was baseball or soccer, because my brother and I both played both sports, but it seemed like at the end of the year banquet or the end of the year ceremony, they would always play this song. I remember this song being played so many times. And they would play it as the team was filing on to the stage where the ceremony was being held, or in front of the crowd on the field where they were being recognized as champions. And, I remember getting mad, and because I wasn't up there. And along with my other teammates, I didn't like being second. I didn't like being last. I didn't like not being first. And we didn't let it discourage us, but we used it as fuel, to make us go out there and try harder and to get better. And, just like the first line of the song, it says, I've paid my dues. And we all know that nothing in sports or nothing in life, for that matter, comes easy. You've got to put in the work. You got to put in the time and obviously the effort. And, I knew that I just couldn't show up my first season and be the best, And a little further down, the song also talks about making mistakes and how, mistakes is what makes us better if we learn from them. That's how we learn, by making mistakes, especially in sports. And I find it interesting that in some of the parts of this song, you have Freddie Mercury playing the piano. I think he's playing the piano. There's a piano playing while he's singing. And it just kind of, to me, it just kind of symbolizes, I don't know if this is how it was intended, but when I hear it, it symbolizes the loneliness, the lonely path to becoming a champion. It's not always, everybody around and, the crowd cheering your name. There's also those early mornings where people are up training. Nobody sees the reps. Nobody sees the practices. Nobody sees the injuries. Nobody sees the pain. And I wonder if maybe that was in their mind as they were creating the song, that, sometimes it's a lonely path to becoming a champion. I don't know. It's just something that goes through my mind. And it talks about having his share of sand kicked in his face, which could be, a way of symbolizing maybe losing a game or loss or maybe people taunting him, or maybe trash talking or whatever. But later on he says, but I've come through. And that's what champions do. You know, they find a way to win. But I hate to lose. And I wouldn't say that I have an unhealthy hatred of losing. I guess you could define it as a healthy hatred of losing. I could be pretty competitive, but I've always, for the most part, been kind of hard on myself, especially in sports and stuff like that. And I love my teams. I love my teams, especially as a kid. And at this particular time, and this particular age that I was, my team was the San Diego Chargers. And because the reason why, back in the late 70s and the early 80s, Arizona did not have a pro football team. So on TV, typically, we would get a Dallas Cowboys game or a San Diego Chargers game, or we get, one in the morning and one in the evening, or sometimes we get both. And again, my team was the Chargers, and I lived and I died with the Chargers. And the cool thing about it was that during those years, they were good. I mean, they were really good. And you talk about offense, man, it was so exciting. They called it Air Coryell. Don Coryell was the coach. And it was like 90% passing, and they barely ran the ball. It was so exciting. And my guy was Dan Fouts. That was my guy, man. That was my hero. And he was the quarterback, and he was awesome. And he had the greatest core of receivers, man. You had John Jefferson, you had Charlie Joyner, you had Kellen Winslow, and you had Wes Chandler. And I don't think they were all of those receivers were on the same team at the same time, but there was a combination of those receivers that Dan Fouts had to throw to, and they were all great. They were all great. They were the best. And I remember one Monday night, it had to be a Monday night football game. And it had to be a Monday night football game because I remember my dad let me stay up late to watch the game because it was the San Diego Chargers. And if it was any other team, he would have just said, no, go to bed. You have a bedtime. You're going to stick to your bedtime. But this case, he let me stay up and watch the game. And they were playing, like crap. They had a bad game. And I'm almost positive, I'm 99% sure that it was the Dallas Cowboys they were playing, no less. And nothing was going our way. It was a terrible game. And I was in my room. I was watching this little bitty TV. And if I remember correct, I'm pretty sure it was black and white. It was an old black and white TV that they let me have. And I could watch it in my room. But I remember watching this game and getting so mad and getting so frustrated because nothing was going our way that I was yelling at the TV. And I was screaming and I was crying. The tears of anger. I was so mad at the TV. And my dad eventually poked his head into my room and he pointed his finger at me and said, don't cry about a football game. And I'm like, okay. And he says, if I have to come back in again, I'm turning it off. And I'm like, okay. And so he closed the door, and I kid you not, 5 minutes later, something happened. I don't remember what it was. It may have been a penalty. It may have been a turnover, a bad call. Something happened, and I just started yelling at the TV. And I forgot, that my dad just came in. I was just yelling out of just pure instinct. And I'm like, no! And 10 seconds later, my dad comes in, and he walks right by me, doesn't even look at me, goes in front of the TV, turns it off, walks right by me without looking at me, and then closes the door as he walks out without saying a word and just leaves me sitting there in the dark. Didn't say a word. And so I'm sitting there in the dark and I'm like, what just happened? And I was like, I guess I better go to sleep now. And it was just kind of a funny memory. But my brother and I, we would play football in the front yard. And we would play football in the front yard because the backyard was a little bit smaller, it seemed, and we had some monkey bars and we had a swing set. So it wasn't opened up, so we couldn't really play, a football game. And also it had better grass in the front yard. And we would come up with these plays. And one day we were out there and we're in our little huddle, and this is where I was talking about imagination in the last video. This is where our imagination just flowed, unhindered. And we're in the huddle, and we're facing each other. We're sitting there looking at each other, and I look at him, I go, you know what? We need jerseys. He's like, yeah, we need jerseys. And so we both run into, and I had this idea. We both run into the house, and we find my mom, and I run up, and I'm like, Mom, we need a couple of Dad's t-shirts. And my brother was right next to me. He's repeating everything. Yeah, Mom, we need a couple of Dad's t-shirts. And we caught her off guard. She's like, what? T-shirts? What do you want t-shirts for? And I'm like, we need jerseys. We need jerseys. And my brother's like, yeah, we're going to make some jerseys. And she's sitting there and she goes, well, all right. And so we turn around, like I said in the beginning, and I can hear her saying, don't use the new ones, use the old ones. And we run into their bedroom and we go to the dresser and I pull open the drawer where he kept his t-shirts and I'm like ransacking, looking for the old ones. And I find a couple old ones. They looked old and we just left. We left the mess there and we ran to the kitchen and we pulled out our markers and we started to make jerseys out of these t-shirts. And we took these markers and on mine, I do this big, huge 14, number 14, because Dan Fouts was number 14 on the front and the back. And on the back, I turned it over and I wrote big, big, bold letters, Fouts. And then my brother was making his, and he wrote 83 on the front and back of his because John Jefferson was his favorite, and he was 83. And I remember him, Jefferson. It took him forever, And the hardest part was we were making the lightning bolts that were on the shoulders. And it was really hard because, we're trying to maneuver the t-shirts so we can, draw on them. And we're trying to, compensate for the curvature of the shoulder. And it didn't turn out the way I envisioned it, but you could see what we were trying to do. And we finally got done and we had jerseys and it was perfect because, these were adult sized t-shirts that, they were from my dad and we were little kids. I mean, I was like maybe 9, maybe 10 at the most. And we put them on and they looked like jerseys because they just hung over us, And so the next time we were out in the front yard playing football, I was always Dan Fouts, obviously, and we had 3 plays. It was so funny because we had play number 1 and my brother was John Jefferson on the left. That was play number 1 and it was a go route. And then play number 2, he was Charlie Joyner on the right side and it was a go route because they threw the ball. That's all they did. They throw the ball. And then play number 3, he was Kellen Winslow, who was the tight end at the time. And he would line up closer to me, kind of like where the tight end would typically line up. And every time he was Kellen Winslow, it'd always be a slant because they ran that all the time. And I remember it would just be like, I'd drop back just a couple steps and it'd be a slant across the front and boom, I'd hit him. And when the Chargers ran that, I mean, it seemed like it worked almost every time because nobody could stop it, man. It was so cool. But we would play and play and play and play. And when we played, it was the Super Bowl. It was always the Super Bowl. And at that time, I would be the quarterback and I would be the announcer and my brother would be the wide receiver. And we would just go through this. It was almost like ritualistic. We would get in the back behind the ball. The ball would be set up, like it is in a football game. And we'd sit back in the huddle, and I would say, okay, we're going to do a number one. And he knew exactly where to line up. And it was always the last play of the game. It was always the last play of the game. There was like 5 seconds left, and we needed a touchdown to win, and it was 4th down, and this was it. This was the Super Bowl. And I would come out, we'd break the huddle, and we'd come out, and it's so corny, but I loved it. It was so corny. But we'd come out, and my brother would trot over to whatever the play was, and I'd go into my announcer mode, and I'd be like, 4th down. The Chargers need a touchdown to win it. Here we are in the Super Bowl. And at that moment, the front yard was not the front yard anymore. This was Jack Murphy Stadium, and that's where the Chargers played. And on the right was a street, and on the left was our house. But it wasn't the street and it wasn't the house. It was the stand, the stadium, and all the people. And I'd get up there, and I would go into announcer mode, and I'd say, all right, the Chargers need a touchdown to win. Fouts walks up, gets under center, and I would walk up, and I would pretend that I was reading the defense. I'd look over, and there was nobody there. And I would look over, I'd pretend I was reading the defense. And then sometimes I would call an audible, which meant I would change the play. So if we were running a number one, which he would be on this side, I'd yell out, I'd go, number two, and he would know what to do. He would run behind the formation, and he'd go to number 2. And then I would get up there, and I would just, I would pretend, it's a Super Bowl, and I would pretend the crowd was so loud. And sometimes quarterbacks would raise their hands, and they would like make this motion to like quiet the crowd. And I would do that, and I would quiet the crowd, and I would pretend I'd get under center, and I'd have the ball, and I'd start yelling out stuff. I didn't even know what I was yelling out, but we would always go on Hut, and I would just yell out numbers. I would be like, 97, and I'd just yell out some stuff, and all of a sudden I'd go, Hut, and I would drop back, and it was kind of cool because Dan Fouts dropped back in 2 different ways. A lot of times he would go sideways, like a typical drop back. And then sometimes he would just do back pedal, which I thought was really cool because he could just get back and he could see the whole field. And sometimes I would do it that way, but that's how he did it. He had a unique way of doing it. And so I would drop back, and my brother would take off, and I would turn into the announcer again. And I would say, Fouts back to pass, 4. I count out the clock, and when he got to the area where we designated was the end zone, I'd throw it. And I'd say, he sees Jefferson in the end zone. And I'd throw the ball. And I'd say, 4, 3, 2. And my brother would catch the ball. And I would go, touchdown, Chargers. And they win the Super Bowl. And, we would run to each other. We'd celebrate. And we won the Super Bowl. And we would walk off the field. And that was always the way we walked off the field. Because a lot of times my mom would be out there, all afternoon and all evening. And my mom would come out and she'd say, boys, it's time for dinner. And every time she said that, I'd be like, one more play. We got to go in on a high note. And we would go through that whole thing. And if for some reason my brother, dropped the ball, or I threw a bad pass, or there was a big tree in the front yard, and sometimes I would throw it too high and it would get caught in the tree, and it would, the ball wouldn't make it. That would mean that there was a penalty. And I would go up and I go, penalty on the play. There's a flag on the play. And I'm like, the Chargers get another chance. And we go through the whole thing again. But the point was that we had to end by us winning the Super Bowl. And, those great Charger teams, they never won a Super Bowl. And they should have, because they were great. But every time my brother and I played football in our front yard, they did. And every time we walked off the field as champions. And this is why this song is where it's at in my Life Through Music playlist. I'm going to put the link in the bottom there. So if you like, click on that. You can hear the song. If you have the song, you know, on your phone or something, I encourage you to listen to it or find it on any platform that you have or can use, and just listen to that, because you can really hear the passion in Freddie Mercury's voice, you know, and to me, when I hear it, I hear perseverance, I hear dedication, and I hear a don't quit attitude. And that's what I hear. And I'm curious to find out what you might hear when you listen to that song. So go find it and listen to it. And as always, I appreciate your time. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.